For over 1,000 years, stone walls were the ultimate defense. Castle walls 10 feet thick could withstand armies for months, even years. Kings built fortresses that seemed invincible. Noble families ruled from behind walls that had protected them for generations. Then came gunpowder, and within a century, those walls became death traps. Castles crumbled. Feudal lords lost their power. Knights became obsolete, and the entire medieval world collapsed. This is the story of how one chemical formula rewrote the rules of warfare, destroyed a 1,000-year-old social order, and created the modern world. The discovery, China's alchemical accident. Gunpowder wasn't invented for war, it was discovered by accident. During China's Tang dynasty, around the 9th century, alchemists searching for an elixir of immortality mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. What they created instead was something that burned fast, exploded violently, and would eventually change human history forever. The Chinese called it fire chemical. At first they used it for fireworks and ceremonies, but by the 10th century, military engineers developed fire lances, early grenades, and primitive rockets. By the 12th century, the Chinese were using crude cannons in warfare. For centuries, gunpowder remained largely a Chinese secret, but when it finally reached Europe, it arrived at exactly the wrong time for the old order. The journey west. How Europe got gunpowder. Gunpowder reached Europe through the Silk Road, Mongol invasions, and Arab traders. The Mongol Empire, which stretched from China to Eastern Europe by the 13th century, employed Chinese engineers and used gunpowder weapons in their conquests. When Mongol armies besieged European cities, defenders witnessed explosions and fire weapons they'd never seen before. Some of that knowledge was captured, some was traded, and some simply spread through observation. By the mid-13th century, the formula appeared in European manuscripts. English philosopher Roger Bacon recorded a recipe around 1267. Within decades, European engineers were experimenting with their own versions. The first European cannons appeared in the early 14th century. They were crude, unreliable, and sometimes more dangerous to the operators than the enemy. But they had one undeniable advantage. They could break stone. And that changed everything. The military revolution, when walls became worthless. Medieval Europe was built on castles. Fortified stone structures dominated the landscape, serving as military strongholds and symbols of feudal power. A well-defended castle could hold off an army for months. This defensive advantage was the foundation of feudalism. Local lords controlled territory because they controlled castles. Kings had to negotiate with powerful nobles because those nobles had fortresses that couldn't be easily taken. The entire political structure of medieval Europe depended on stone walls. Gunpowder shattered that system. Literally. By the late 14th and early 15th centuries, cannons had become powerful enough to breach castle walls. The Hundred Years' War saw some of the first effective use of siege artillery. French forces under Charles VII deployed large bombards that could smash through medieval fortifications. What once took months now took days. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 demonstrated gunpowder's devastating power. The Ottoman Turks brought massive cannons to the siege, including the famous bombard built by Hungarian engineer Orban. These cannons fired stone balls weighing over 600 pounds. The walls of Constantinople, which had stood for over 1,000 years, crumbled under the bombardment. The city fell, the Byzantine Empire ended, and the world took notice. Suddenly, every castle in Europe was obsolete. Defensive walls that had protected families for generations became liabilities. And when the castles fell, so did the old order. The rise of nation-states, power shifts to kings. Gunpowder didn't just destroy castles, it destroyed the political system that depended on them. Cannons were expensive. They required specialized knowledge, foundries, engineers, gunpowder production facilities, and trained artillery crews. Most importantly, they required centralized resources that only kings and large states could afford. Feudal lords who had once been semi-independent powers now found themselves dependent on monarchs who controlled artillery. A king with cannons could reduce any noble's castle to rubble. Rebellious vassals who once felt safe behind stone walls were suddenly at the mercy of royal firepower. This centralization of military power led directly to the rise of strong nation-states. In France, kings used artillery to break the power of independent nobles and unify the kingdom. In England, the Tudor monarchs consolidated power through control of gunpowder weapons. In Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella used cannons to complete the Reconquista and forge a unified Spanish state. The medieval system of distributed power gave way to centralized monarchies that controlled territory through professional armies equipped with gunpowder weapons. Borders became more defined. National identities strengthened. The modern European state system began to emerge. Warfare transformed. The end of knights and castles. For centuries, the armoured knight on horseback was the dominant force on European battlefields. Knights were expensive to train and equip, making them the exclusive domain of the nobility. Their armour could deflect arrows and swords. They were the medieval equivalent of tanks. Gunpowder made them irrelevant. Early firearms like arquebuses and muskets could penetrate armour that had taken a lifetime of wealth to acquire. A peasant with a few weeks of training could kill a knight who had trained since childhood. The battlefield advantage that had belonged to the aristocratic warrior class for centuries disappeared almost overnight. By the 16th century, European armies were transitioning to mass infantry formations armed with pikes and firearms. The Spanish tercios, Swiss pike squares, and Swedish formations under Gustavus Adolphus dominated battlefields not through individual valour, but through disciplined volleys of musket fire. This democratization of warfare had profound social consequences. War was no longer the exclusive domain of nobles. Commoners with guns could defeat aristocrats in armour. The social hierarchy that had defined medieval Europe began to crack. Castles became museums, knights became ceremonial, and the medieval world that had lasted for over 1,000 years came to an end, not with a collapse, but with an explosion. The legacy. One formula changed everything. Gunpowder didn't just change military tactics, it reshaped the political map of Europe. It ended feudalism and birthed nation-states. It destroyed the warrior aristocracy and created mass armies of common soldiers. It made stone walls obsolete and forced engineers to invent entirely new forms of fortification. The star forts that replaced medieval castles, the professional standing armies that replaced feudal levies, the centralized monarchies that replaced fragmented lordships, all of these were direct responses to gunpowder. The Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the rise of European global empires, all happened in a world transformed by this single chemical formula. From Chinese alchemy labs to the walls of Constantinople, from feudal castles to modern nation-states, gunpowder's journey through history is the story of how technology rewrites the rules of power. And it's a reminder that the world you know can be reshaped by a single invention. If you made it this far, hit subscribe. There's more where this came from. Thanks for watching.